just talking about how adolescence is a very unique time for any teen, as well as their parent. It's a very unique time because teens tend to lean less on the advice of their parents and tend to lean in more towards the approval and the acceptance of their peers. It's usually during this time that teens strive for more independence. They tend to push boundaries a little bit more. If you're a parent of a teen, I'm sure you can attest to that. They tend to journey into the world of social media and those influencers, and they seek out new relationships, both platonic and romantic. Because teens tend to be more influenced by these outside groups, it's important that lines of communication are open at home about things such as boundaries, warning signs of toxic relationships, and then how to build and maintain healthy relationships. The earlier we start these conversations, the more you set your teen up for success as they start kind of branching out into their own individuality and independence. So today, my goal is to chat with you a little bit about how to define dating violence. Sorry, I have multiple screens going, so I'm looking over here because that's where my slide is. So if it doesn't look like I'm looking at you, I'm still here. How to define dating violence and identify warning signs with your child. What signs to look for if you're worried your teen may be in a toxic relationship or an unhealthy relationship, or if they may be the unhealthy one in that relationship too. How to talk to your teen about dating violence, and then how to help your teen define and build what healthy looks like. The conversation is two-sided, both unhealthy and healthy. So I have quite a bit of information to give you today to kind of help set the stage for that. A common phrase that we often hear from parents or caregivers when we talk about dating violence is, well, if I talk to my teen about dating violence, won't they just be more at risk for being in those types of relationships? The truth is actually quite the opposite. The more that we talk to our teens about dating violence and about what healthy relationships look like, the more we prepare them for recognizing it and looking for those things. They're more comfortable then to also talk to us if they start to recognize, this person is starting to have some of those warning signs that we talked about. They're more inclined to reach out to you as their caregiver when they start to notice those things, because the lines of communication are already open. You've already started that conversation that's opening up that door for further information. Plus, the reality of it is that whether we talk to our teens about it or not, dating violence is occurring among teens at an alarmingly high rate. So some of the statistics that we are seeing about dating violence is that 1 in 3 young people will be in an abusive relationship. Violent behaviors also oftentimes begin between 6th and 12th grade. That's usually when teens and preteens are starting to experiment with relationships. You kind of have like your first boyfriend or girlfriend around that time. And, we're seeing violence starting younger and younger because of what they may be seeing at home too. 1 in 10 teenage males have experienced sexual or physical violence, including stalking by an intimate partner. Another thing that we have to consider in terms of talking to our teens and our youth about this is that we can't just talk to the girls. We have to make sure that we're also talking to the boys, because guys can be just as much victims of domestic violence as females are. And we're seeing it at about 1 in 10 rate, and possibly even higher, because a lot of young men don't reach out regarding needing help because of toxic masculinity, fear of what their fellow guy friends are going to think. So even the 1 in 10 could be something closer to about 1 in 7, or maybe even 1 in 4. It depends on what demographic we're looking at. 24% of youth in same-sex relationships experience psychological and or physical abuse from their partner. So we're seeing that teens that are in same-sex relationships, because it may not necessarily fit into the typical gender norms of a relationship, masculine versus feminine, that sometimes the imbalance of power is overlooked or not clearly defined. So they're experiencing violence almost at a higher rate than heterosexual relationships because there's not a clear understanding of what equality in the relationship looks like, or even an understanding of what to look for in terms of an imbalance of power that's fueled by power and control. That's really the foundation of what unhealthy is in a relationship. And then the scary statistic is that only about 1/3 of teens who experience dating violence ever seek out assistance, ever reach out for help. A lot of times this is tied to being afraid of what their parent or caregiver or trusted adult may think. It goes back to kind of what we started with in talking about their independence. You know, I kind of got myself into this, so it's kind of my job to get myself out. They may not even know what laws or rights they have in terms of seeking out support. So the state of California, and this is great for any parent to know, is the state of California recognizes that this is becoming more of an issue among teens. And so a lot of DV programs obtaining restraining orders for teenagers can start at as young as 13. A lot of times when we go into the schools will also inform the students of this, because obviously we want them to have parent support, but if for any reason there's hesitation in terms of parent support, they can also go to a domestic violence center or a sheriff's station and seek out safety without parental consent too. I know from our program, we're always there to support the victim, or I like to call them survivors. But so we're always going to encourage youth to have a trusted adult that they seek out to engage their parents, but we also want them to know that safety is also available to them if they're even afraid to tell their parents or whatever trusted adult is in their life. So because of that statistic, that's why conversations like these are so important, and why I'm so happy we have so many participants tonight, because a lot of parents don't have these conversations. They don't know where to begin. They're hesitant because maybe they don't even know the facts. So I'm glad that we have so many people involved here, because this allows you to become an ally for your teen. Because inevitably they're going to hit hard relationships. There's going to be ups and downs. And by knowing this information and painting a clear picture and showing that you're giving them the tools that they need to have healthy relationships, you're really allowing them to maneuver through the world at an easier pace that often minimizes the danger of violence or glorifies it. You know, we're going to look a little bit at media and have a little brief discussion in terms of that. Is that when we're looking at the TV shows that are out there, the songs that are out there, the music videos, oftentimes it goes directly against everything that I'm going to try to share with you today. So again, being here sets the stage for success for your teens. So the question is, where do we begin, right? The important part of talking to your child about relationships is making sure that you are painting a clear picture with them. That means you're discussing both healthy and unhealthy. So studies over the years have shown that parents tend to focus more on talking to their child about what a healthy relationship looks like without ever really discussing about the warning signs or what even abuse is. One study that we found stated that 74% of sons and 66% of daughters said that they had not had a conversation about dating abuse with a parent in the past year. Which means parents, again, we're painting kind of like a half picture, because I think we go back to that common myth that we heard at the beginning is like, well, if I talk to my kid about this, and they're more at risk. So if they don't know about it, that they don't know what to look for, what to try, or, you know, they're not as glued to it. But this also means that several preteens and teens then are entering into their first dating relationships without really having a full understanding of what possibly could happen. This only makes them more vulnerable to become a victim or a perpetrator of abuse. And with media and their peers feeding them false and over-dramatized and unhealthy versions of what real relationships look like, we're setting them up for a possibly very dangerous scenario to play out. So learning the definitions, the signs of both unhealthy and healthy is the perfect place to start when we're preparing to have these conversations. So again, when we're talking about toxic relationships, it's important for us to share with our teens that there's a difference between unhealthy and abusive. A relationship can be unhealthy without crossing the line into abusive. Now, everybody's line as to where that falls is going to be different. So just getting down to the motive behind the action, sharing with them the difference between unhealthy is something that, yeah, it may not be super healthy, but it's something that can be talked about, worked out. When we get to the healthy part, you'll understand what I'm talking about a little bit more. There's a slight imbalance of power, but one person doesn't have all the power. And there's opportunity for growth. In an abusive relationship, the motive behind the action is to intentionally harm another person, to belittle, to destroy, to isolate, to demean in such a way that one person has all the power in the relationship. The other person has zero. So just understanding the difference between the definition of the two. So that way, if your teen says, my boyfriend or my girlfriend is starting to act this way, it's like, okay, for you, is that defined as unhealthy? Do you feel like that's something that we can work through? Or do you think that they're maybe crossing the line into abusive where you don't feel like you have any power? So getting a definition from that is a good starting point. So the definition of abuse, because I want to talk a little bit more about the extreme a little bit, is abuse is the use of physical, emotional, verbal, sexual, or technological conduct by a person to harm, threaten, intimidate, or control a person, regardless of whether that relationship is continuing or it has ended. So having this definition on hand is really, really helpful for a couple reasons. Within this one definition, you can go over all the different types of abuse. You can see that there's physical. So asking your teen, what does physical abuse look like to you? Have you seen it amongst your friends? What are some common themes? Have you seen things in movies or shows? Helping them define it. Emotional and verbal kind of go hand in hand. Put downs, how do your friends talk about their partners behind their backs? Kind of defining that with them, because something that they may see as so normalized because all of their peers are doing it, they may not recognize are actually red flags to possibly abusive and controlling relationships. So kind of combating what society has normalized in a way. Sexual, again, when you feel ready to have that conversation with your child about consent, what does consent not look like? It's not manipulated, it's not coerced, it's not forcing someone to do something. And then technological, technology today has just opened up a whole new ball game in terms of ways a dating partner can control another dating partner, following people through apps, harassing them through text messages. We'll go over some examples in a little bit too, but just understanding the apps that your children are on. I know I don't have any children of my own, but understanding the way TikTok works. In my mind, I don't want to know how TikTok works. I don't want to be on TikTok, but if you have a kid, it's almost especially a teenager who's active on that, knowing what's on there, knowing how the texting feature works, the commenting features, the same with Snapchat or any other app that they may be on. So that way you can know what are different ways that someone may get into contact with my child through technology. So again, familiarizing yourself with their world, because it is an avenue to which abuse can come from. And then just because a relationship has ended doesn't mean that it's safe. Someone can leave an abusive partner or even an abusive friend, leave a toxic friendship, but the abuse can still be happening. So making sure that we're checking in with our children, even after they leave an unhealthy relationship, because the abuse may still be coming in the forms of stalking or continually harassing online, trying to get to people through friends or showing up where they are. So just being aware of, just because the person's out of your child's life doesn't mean that the harassment isn't. There are, being able to define abuse is a good starting point, but it's not the full picture. And that's only one part of the equation. The second part is helping your child understand what the warning signs are. So these are just kind of what they're titled as. They're warning signs, they're red flags. They're little things for you and your teen to kind of keep tabs on. If you start to recognize, their boyfriend or girlfriend is starting to act a little bit more jealous than normal, mark it down, write it in a notebook. have them kind of say, what day is it today? 5/25/22, boyfriend got jealous because I was talking to my next door neighbor, kind of keeping an eye on it, because these are things when we start to see a pattern of these things happen, that's when it really becomes a huge red flag and when we possibly need to seek out further assistance. So jealousy. Everyone has felt jealous one time or another, but it's when the jealousy crosses the line into creating controlling behaviors, creating this idea of I have a right to do this because of how I'm feeling. That's when we start to cross the line into abusive and controlling jealousy, controlling behaviors as to what they wear, who they can and can't talk to, who they can and can't follow online. If all of a sudden you have a teenager who isn't talking to their best friend anymore, that could be a check-in. Is like, did something happen? Did someone say you can't do that? Checking in. Quick involvement. The more common phrase for that right now is love bombing, jumping into the relationship really quick, overly loving on someone, saying, I can't live without you. I'm so happy you're in my life, like within the first hour of meeting them. That's when we start to see this quick involvement. It's about putting a label to the relationship versus building a healthy relationship. Setting unrealistic expectations and dependencies, keeping your child from who they love, who they care about, activities that they love to do. So like after school activities, isolating them. That goal is to keep your child from having any avenue out. The less lifelines a child has or a partner has in the relationship, the less likely they are to reach out for help. And if they do leave the relationship, less people to support them in that choice to walk away. Blaming of the survivor or the victim in the relationship, gaslighting them, altering reality just enough to where they're questioning if what's happening is really happening. Hypersensitivity, 1 minute they're completely fine, and then the next minute their temper is out of control. I don't like to use the phrase out of control because in abusive relationship, it's all about maintaining control over the victim. So they can hold their temper when they're sitting in class, or they can hold their temper while they're having dinner at your house. But then when they're one-on-one is when they quote unquote lose the temper. So I don't like to use the phrase losing control, but it paints a pretty clear picture of what I'm talking about in terms of hypersensitivity. 1 minute they're fine, next minute they seem to be not okay and there's a fight or an argument. Any cruelty towards animals or others, I always say the way someone treats someone else is also telling of how they're willing to treat you, especially in toxic friendships. If you have a child whose best friend is constantly smack talking behind another friend's back, there's a good chance that that friend is doing the same thing to your child behind their back. So just the way that they treat and talk about other people is also pretty telling of how they possibly are talking and treating you behind your back. Any use of force during arguments is sex. That's all about power and control. Threats, threatening to harm someone if they try to leave, threats to harm themselves if they try to leave, and then destroying property. Especially if they don't want to leave any bruises, don't want to leave any cuts or anything, they'll destroy property instead. So we've seen teens destroying school supplies, ripping up school books and things like that as a way of an intimidation. And then again, using that to almost place the blame back on the victim as well. So again, these warning signs are just that, signs to keep an eye out for. Now these signs, they kind of start subtly. So like the controlling behaviors could be, are you really sure you want to wear that today? Or your friends really don't care about me that much, so why don't we just ditch them and go hang out, just the two of us? We'll go on a date. They skew things in just a way where it starts subtly until the abuse they're kind of locked in at that point. And they do it all underneath this guise of love, this idea of I'm doing this because I love you. Because I love you, I want to share locations. But in their mind, if the motive is to harm, threaten, and intimidate, it's not about love. It's all about control. So again, painting that picture with your teen, helping them understand how these can be dangerous and what the dangerous side looks like. So that way they can know the difference between jealousy that's able to be talked about and jealousy that's dangerous. So being able to paint that clear picture is helpful. And then the second part of painting a clear picture for your teen is talking about what healthy looks like. Numerous studies have shown that if I were to open up the chat box and let you list everything that's needed for a healthy relationship, it can really be summarized into 6 categories. We have communication, compromise, commitment, compatibility, consideration, and conduct. So those 6 things do have to work together all the time in order for a relationship to be healthy. So communication, that's going to involve active listening. Active listening is, teens tend to be in a habit of hearing but not listening. It goes in one ear and out the other, and not really engaging in the conversation. For any relationship to be healthy, active listening needs to be present. The way that they talk to their partner, the tone of voice that they use, their body language. Are they scrolling through Instagram instead of looking their partner in the eye? Their body language. Are they, open to them? Are they facing them? Are they making eye contact? And then if they do have conflict, are they using I statements, feeling statements, or are they placing blame statements, you statements? You did this, you said this, now you're the reason I'm acting like this, versus I'm feeling frustrated because I had an understanding and I would like to talk about it. Completely saying the same conversation, but completely different approaches and momentum for that conversation. Communication is at the very core of everything that a healthy relationship takes. Compromising, it's the art of give and take, both people being heard, both people being part of the solution. If your child is in a relationship where they're constantly giving, they're constantly the one having a compromise, and the other partner isn't, then that's an imbalance of power that needs to be addressed. Loyalty, a lot of times I ask teens, what does loyalty mean? And I just get, that just means not cheating. It's so much more than that. It's so much more than being loyal to the other person. It's following through with what you say you're going to do or promises that you make. It's working through problems together when the problems arise and out of respect for one another. I always say, it's kind of when, like the stuff hits the fans, you don't go running for the hills. You stay, you maybe cool down a little bit, and then you talk about it. It's not ghosting someone simply because you felt wronged by them. But again, commitment is all about respect for the other person. And then compatibility, seeing eye to eye on the foundational parts of the relationship in terms of moral beliefs, boundaries. Do your boundaries line up with one another? Do your expectations for the relationship complement each other as well? Even when a relationship is not 100% compatible, the relationship can still be healthy. It just takes a lot more work, a lot more effort to communicate, a lot more effort to compromise. But the more compatible a partnership is, the healthier that relationship is going to be and the easier it's going to be. I always say, my brother and I are like oil and water. We couldn't be more opposite if we tried. So our relationship takes a lot more work versus me and my best friend who see more eye to eye on a lot of things. So again, a relationship would still be healthy without it being 100% compatible, but just understanding that your teen and their partner will have to put in a little extra work. Consideration is understanding each person's unique points of views in the relationship. Sometimes that means putting yourself in the other person's shoes. If you are planning a really nice date, if your teens are planning a really nice date for their partner, but their partner doesn't have a really good day at school and isn't feeling up for it, it's having respect that the needs of your partner has changed. And that may look different than what your needs are at that moment. And what does that mean? Does that mean I get angry and scream and throw a little hissy fit because I can't do the date that I want? No, that means meeting my partner where they are at that time. And sometimes that means putting our own needs to the side in order to meet the other person where they are, and vice versa. Again, all of these things should be equal. It's kind of one of those balancing scales. If one part goes up one time, then eventually it has to go back up and balanced at the same time. If one person's constantly changing and doing everything and meeting the other person's need, then it's not balanced, and everything has to be equal in that relationship. And then finally, conduct is ultimately how you act in a relationship, physically and emotionally. I ultimately say it's the golden rule of life: treat others the way you want to be treated. You know, what you give in a relationship is often what you're going to receive. If I'm in a partnership and I'm coming at them with you statements and blaming and constantly putting them down, my partner's either going to become very defensive or shut down completely. But if I am conducting with kindness and respect and value the other person's voice and opinion, then I should be receiving that back. I say should because there are instances where we have relationships where there is that imbalance of power. So if you're a teen, if you're talking to them about what healthy conduct is in a relationship, and they say, well, I do all that things, but they never do any of that. We've tried talking to them, but they never talk. Or I'm always the one that has to compromise. Then that's when we start to see, well, that's an imbalance of power. And that's someone who's not committed to the relationship, who's not willing to compromise, and someone who may not be able to be in your child's life and should be able to talk with them a little bit more about that. So again, like I said at the beginning, it's important to explain to your child that for a relationship to be considered healthy, all 6 of these things must always be working together. I always tell the teens that I talk to in the high school, it's not the Burger King menu. You don't get to have it your way. It's all 6 or none. So if you're talking to your teen and they're like, well, I've got about 5 out of 6, so that's got to be good enough, right? No, there's still work to be done. And so just seeking out opportunities to help walk them through that. So if at any time, again, your child starts to see a pattern of unhealthy behaviors or starts to feel unsafe with having a conversation about pointing their relationship back in a healthy way, it may be time to take more extreme measures to leave that relationship. So we've kind of provided the picture of both unhealthy and healthy and kind of gave you the foundation for how to have those conversations with your child and kind of where to begin. But a lot of times you still may be asking yourself, okay, that's great and all, but how can I tell if my child is in an unhealthy relationship? Like, are there signs that I could be looking out for? And like, what signs should I maybe look out for if my child is the unhealthy or possibly even abusive ones? Like, what are some tips about that and starting that conversation? Thankfully, there are some subtle ways that you can kind of clue in and discover that your child may need support. So in terms of red flags for children who may need support, if you feel like your child may be in an unhealthy relationship as the victim, there's some little things that you can kind of look out for. One is extreme jealousy or possessiveness from their partner. If their partner starts to show like a little over obsession with your child, that could be signs that that person is a little controlling. If your child all of a sudden has unexplained marks, bruises, or injuries, again, they may even excuse them of like, oh, no, I just fell again, or you know how clumsy I am, or oh, they may try to hide it. So just cluing in that if there's changes in their attitude or how they kind of respond to you asking them questions about that, it could be very telling. If all of a sudden they're trying to dismiss what's happening, there's more to that story, and to keep digging as their parent. If they're receiving constant text or calls or messages from their partner, if your child starts to panic if they don't have their phone, I mean, I feel like teens panic anyways if they don't have their phone, but if it's almost like a no, mom, I need my phone. You don't understand. I need, so-and-so is going to text me. I need that. That's a red flag that there's an unhealthy connection to someone on the other end of the phone. If they're experiencing levels of depression or anxiety, if they start to have decreased interest in extracurricular activities or interests, that can kind of go back to the isolation piece that we were talking about. Is their abusive partner possibly limiting their access to those things, minimizing it, maybe they're, I don't really like to talk to that friend anymore, like isolation from friends and family. If all of a sudden they no longer talk to a certain friend that they've talked to since they were like babies, then that's also a telling sign that there could be something else going on, especially if they got into a new relationship, and that's kind of a result of that. And then changes in appearance. If you have a child who really cares about what they look like, they have the latest makeup trend on, or, they're overspraying cologne, as we know every teenager does nowadays. And all of a sudden they change, they're covering up more, they're not doing their hair as much, they've stopped wearing cologne or whatever. That could be signs of also that controlling behavior of someone saying, I don't want you wearing that. Or I don't want people looking at you that way, or you're my person and this is how I want my person to dress. So keep an eye on, again, these are things when you've noticed a shift. And I'll talk a little bit about trusting your gut in a second, but those are some warning signs that can clue you in that your child needs support as the survivor in the situation. So I'm going to take a real quick swig of water. Now, if you're, if you start to recognize that your child may be more of an aggressive party, if you're concerned about that, some warning signs to that may be that they are extremely jealous and possessive of their partner. If they feel like I constantly need to be with them, or, accusing them of acting a certain way, and it's kind of all fueled by jealousy, we're going to start to see that. A lot of teens have it in their mind that possessiveness equals love. And we have to combat what the world is saying about that. And kind of help them see the opposite, that possessiveness, jealousy does not mean like, oh, well, doesn't that just mean that they love me? Doesn't that just mean that they, isn't that cute that I'm the only person for them? But helping them understand what the dangers of that are. If they continually blame their partner for things going wrong in their relationship and never taking ownership for possibly the role they play. If they're obsessive over their partner's actions and whereabouts, especially the whereabouts piece. If someone is so concerned about where's my partner, who they're talking to, one of the controlling behaviors that teens have really talked to us about lately is that their partner, if they're going to a friend's house, their partner, if they're abusive or unhealthy, then they will say, when you get there, I want you to FaceTime me when you get there so I know who you're with. Because there's no trust. There needs to be trust in the relationship. And so the aggressor will tend to have no trust and want to know everything about what the other person's doing, and has a very hard time when they're separated from that person because they feel a loss of control. They're hypersensitive, kind of like what I was talking about. 1 minute they're fine, the next minute they're losing their temper. There's aggression behind them towards animals or other people, aggressive behaviors. The positive thing out of here is that everything that's listed, even on the aggressor side, they're learned behaviors. They learn them from someplace, which also means that they can be unlearned. And that's where the communication piece comes in. So like I said, trust your gut. A lot of times people will say like, well, what's the difference? Like, how do I know that the aggression isn't just my teenager being a teenager? We all know that, our teens have up and down emotional roller coasters. They have new friends every other day, it feels like. But you know your teen better than anyone else. So if you start to have reason for concern, I always say trust the gut. It is your body's natural alarm system, and you as their parent almost have like an extra alarm system. Your natural instinct is to protect your child. So if you start to recognize red flags, plus you have your own history, you have your own experiences and lived experiences with past relationships or friendships, that you tend to know like, okay, I've had a friend like that before. And so I kind of see where this can end up. Trust the instinct, trust your experience, and use that as the fuel to start the conversations out of a place of concern and care. And I always say, lean into the gut feeling, because I'd rather dig a little deeper and find nothing than not dig at all and then discover something later on. So again, trust the gut. So starting the conversations, kind of why we're all here, is how then do I talk to my child just in general about dating violence, starting the conversation, or when I start to recognize possible red signs, how do I start that conversation? The first thing I always start with is choose the time and location of the talk appropriately. Don't like spring the conversation on your kid or do it after, during a fight or something that's been brought up. Try to lean into it gradually. Start the conversation small, asking questions. Your child will be more open to share if they feel like it's a one-on-one conversation. Around the dinner table is probably not the best time to have a conversation, unless it's the two of you and that's the place where you talk, then great. But especially if there's other family members around, it may be time to like, hey, let's go run some errands, and just open up the lines of communication that way. Avoid judgment and keep an open mind. It can be easy going into a conversation thinking we know best. This kind of mentality has the potential to shut down the conversation rather quickly. Remember, this is their first time being a teenager, and that means allowing them time to learn and share their own experiences. Have an open mind, learn about their world, and that kind of goes into the next one. Be willing to listen and learn, share your input, share your concerns, but then ask questions. Provide a safe space where your teen can share openly. Remember that this is their world. They're growing up as a teenager in a very different day and age than we grew up as teenagers. And so we have a lot to learn still. Ask questions about their friends' relationships. Sometimes that opens up communication a lot easier than tell me about your relationship. But say like, hey, I know Tommy started dating Rachel. How's that going? How do they treat each other? Starting talking about learn about celebrities that they look up to. Is that healthy? Talk about themes that you see between people that they follow. Help them paint a picture of very easy for us to go into mama bear and papa bear mode without thinking of the harm that it can do in the long run. So provide examples that can help paint a clear picture for them. Reaffirm that you support your teen in any decision that they make. By telling your child what to do, you ultimately push them farther into the arms of the relationship. The same way as if I told you, don't think about a pink elephant, half of you probably thought about a pink elephant. The same thing, if you tell your children, don't do this, they tend to be more drawn to try to do that thing. So asking your child how you can support them in giving power back to them and helps keep the line of communication open. Even if you don't have concerns, you can still establish yourself as an ongoing support for them. And then lead by example. Like I said before, behaviors are learned in the home, both healthy and unhealthy behaviors. So how your teens react and act in their relationships is usually mirrored of what they see at home. So if you continually show healthy, that will start to be the standard by which they set their future relationships by. You guys can learn together too. Don't, again, feel like you have to be absolutely perfect at it. Learn together. It's a great opportunity for you to teach each other what communication looks like to each other. And then revisit the topic often. Don't let this be a one-time conversation. Start young, junior high, even elementary school. Sometimes we're seeing behaviors are starting, like I said, as young as 6th grade. So start the conversation young and then continually revisit. Don't wait until there's an incident or a concern to have a conversation. Continually check in with your child, check in with them about their friends' relationships, who they're following, who they're engaging with, and then allow that to kind of be the norm. The more natural we make the conversations become in our family, the healthier and more opportunities you give your child to reach out and come to you if they do start to see red flags, because they already know the phrasing, they already know you are there as a support. And then lastly, if you do feel as though professional help is needed to address your teen's current situation, there are plenty of agencies and hotlines that are available for you in a moment's notice. So feel free to take a picture of this slide if you want. Love is Respect is probably the number one resource I can give you today. They have a wonderful website, great for teens and for parents, different ways to support, all about healthy and unhealthy relationships. You can provide the text number to any of your children if they want to talk to someone. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is always a good one to have. Safety Alliance Group is a local agency that if you start to recognize your child may be more of the aggressor in the relationship, they can offer support. And then the Trevor Lifeline, the Trevor Project is support for LGBTQIA plus youth that may need a little extra support, or how to be an ally for them in any time of struggle or conflict. And then lastly, our information, Child and Family Center. We have our main number. We offer mental health services, substance use services, and domestic violence services to the community. And we also have a 24-hour crisis hotline. So if an incident or you need support during the weekends or the holiday breaks when we're not open, that's a great one to have. Our social media, Child and Family Center, the child_family_center is more for adults and more about our programs. The function one, FN_CTION, is teen specific. We talk to teens, we are a place for teens, giving them the tools to function healthy in today's world. This month is Mental Health Awareness Month, so everything mental health is what you're going to see on there today. But that's all I have for you. I did want to open it up for any questions. I also put my email up there for you, just in case you had a question pop up later, or I can help point you to someone who can answer.
And Leah, thank you so much. That was very informative. I really loved it. And I actually have a question for you from one of our viewers. They asked, are teens raised in a domestic violence situation more likely to be survivors and/or abusers in relationships than the quote unquote average teen? How do we undo that?
Yeah, so absolutely. So teenagers, young people who grow up in a house where domestic violence is present, that's their normal. To them, seeing fighting, seeing violence, seeing or hearing put downs, to them, that's normal. So if that's all they've seen, then they're more inclined to be drawn to that unhealthy as well. They're more drawn to it because to them, that's normal. To them, that's safe. To them, that's something that's not out of the norm for me. Healthy becomes scary to them because that's not normal to them. So they are, I want to say the statistic is about 5 times more likely to either become a survivor of domestic violence or a perpetrator of domestic violence, simply because what's normalized in the home is often what they will practice when they get into their own relationships. The way that we combat that is having these conversations, being the trusted adult in the situation, finding ways for them to learn what healthy looks like and identify unhealthy. Because again, if they've grown up in a household where domestic violence is always present, they may not even recognize that it's healthy or unhealthy. I had a friend who grew up in a very abusive household physically. So when she got into her own dating relationships and she got pushed around or shoved or beat up, to her, it was like, okay, another Tuesday, no big deal. It wasn't until someone painted the picture of her like, no, that's not normal, showing them what healthy is, showing them what it looks like to be in a respecting and valuing relationship, did they even recognize that what was happening was actually unhealthy. So it's being willing to be kind of the voice of reason in the midst of the chaos. It's having these conversations and trying to get support to the family too. I hope that answered your question.
I'm still open to having more questions. I have the chat open. Give it another 5 minutes or so. I got an announcement at the very end, but if anyone else has questions, please feel free to send them down.
While we wait for any questions, our mental health services, I do want to let you know that they're open from infancy all the way up to adolescence for our mental health, and it's for Medi-Cal and Medi-Cal eligible participants. We do have an AT grant put in place that offers funding for treatment for children who have experienced trauma or violence, so we can help get them linked to services. Our substance use program and our domestic violence program are for adolescents all the way up into adulthood. SUD, our substance use group, our program is for Medi-Cal and Medi-Cal eligible. And our domestic violence program and crisis shelter are free of cost and no need for insurance for either one of those.
Awesome. Just a reminder that we will be having a parent engagement workshop next month. And it's going to be titled Secret Stash. Where are my kids hiding drugs? We are going to have Detective Jeffrey Kasick from the LA County Sheriff's Department, and they'll provide information on where drugs, paraphernalia are hidden, how kids are buying drugs through social media, and the secret messages behind, like the emojis the kids use, and suppliers. This will be held Wednesday, June 22nd at 6 p.m. on Zoom. So if you would like to receive emails on those upcoming workshops, please feel free to drop your email address in the chat box. You could direct message me. We could send the emails directly to you. If we do not have any more questions, I want to thank all of you for joining us, and have a great evening. We hope to see you next month.